We're living in turbulent times. Frequent terror attacks, natural disasters, man-made disasters, and seemingly avoidable disasters. You'd have to be made of stone not to be moved by the things we're experiencing. And of course it goes without saying that these things hurt and affect most of us. And of course our thoughts are with those affected. But overwhelmingly, I'm feeling pressured about what my response must be to each of these events, that somehow, if I'm not rushing to change my profile pictures, issue condolences immediately on social media, or pause for minute silences, that somehow I don't care. A race to be the first to hug victims, in front of cameras, obviously, has become the latest sport to those losing the race deemed robotic. During the election, my team in Hull was branded heartless after handing out leaflets 2 days after a terror attack 200 miles away, and separately, I was subject to scores of hate-filled messages after an email regarding my election campaign was sent, not by me, to people a day after a different terror attack because somehow I was disrespecting the dead. We've seen the rise of political correctness and the damage it's doing, and I beg people not to embark on a new offence campaign, emotional correctness.
Michelle, I understand the point, but I think the essence here is about respect. You know, if there is a tragedy and there is a minute's silence, there's nothing wrong with that. All it's really doing is just coming out and saying that I am concerned and I want to show my respect. I think you're kind of putting it a bit out of context because you're throwing the whole lot into a bowl of soup to say that we've got to be doing it all day long. You know, if I'm at a football game, you know, and somebody's passed away, I absolutely want to show respect. And I think when you don't do that, it's not about politically correct. I just think it's disrespectful.
So I don't share your view. I think that if you, well, I do in some ways actually, if you want to, if the way that you choose to show respect to a terrible incident is to involve yourself in a silence or a changing profile picture or whatever else it is, I completely respect that view. Where I'm saying is it's getting to the point, and I felt this in the election campaign because the electioneering was paused after both terror attacks. And it was a very fluid situation. So you'd wake up in the morning and you would not be sure what was the respectful thing to do. Because, of course, you're hurt and concerned when there was an attack and you feel for the victims.
Michelle, you put yourself out there in the public domain, you become a public figure, and people expect something in that situation. And unfortunately, it just goes with the territory. And people expect, because if you're out there and you're campaigning and you're on television and you are not seen because you're kind of supposed to set the example.
But for me, the example, so let me just stick with my particular experience of the election campaign. So you show your respects, you know, you pause the campaigning. Now, to me, the time that you actually want to see strong politicians, you want to engage with the politicians, you want to hear, what are you going to do about this? How are you going to help us? How are you going to keep us safe? I would want somebody knocking on my doors. I wouldn't see that as being disrespectful. And actually what it turned into other candidates using it as fuel. Look at her. She doesn't care. Everyone, hello. She doesn't care because 3 days ago, hundreds of miles away, something happened and someone in her team has just posted a leaflet. She doesn't care that people have been attacked. It was the most ridiculous thing.
Is it about how people judge? Do you think it's about how people judge you rather than the lack of respect? Is it that people are judgmental and if you don't behave in a certain way after something's happened, either through social media or in a public place, is that your point? My
point and my concern is that, as I've already expressed multiple times, I'm concerned about political correctness and it's going too far and what that's led to. My concern, and if I look at, for example, Grenfell Tower, what happened there was absolutely awful. But that's now turned into almost like a competition between politicians as to who can be photographed hugging as many people as quickly as possible. Because look at me, I'm going to cuddle him. That means that I care. Look at her. She's over there talking to those people. Well, I'm not being funny, but the reality was, let me just finish my point about that. My reality was, when you looked at how people wanted to receive Theresa May, they were furious. They were absolutely going mental about her and what she'd done. And then I'm going to say to you, go and meet them. You're going to be slightly reluctant to do so. It doesn't mean that you're callous.
Well, that's what I
or
take.
That you don't care.
Well, just give me one of this, and then Afua, that's what the only positive. I agree with James. If you want to take part in a minute's silence, or you want to stay quiet before a rugby or football match, absolutely right. But where I do think you're onto something is that fairly soon, when you ring the emergency service, it'll be fire, police, ambulance, Mrs May or Jeremy Corbyn. Which do you want to come round first? That's how it'll be. And our politicians will be judged on how lachrymose they can be, which is absolutely absurd. It'll be just how soon they can weep and how much they can emote. That is not leadership. So I take from that, I agree with that. We must not judge politicians by how much they can make us cry or how many children they can hug. But if you want to have a minute's silence, I think we should live in a country where we can do that.
Well, I actually find this debate quite ironic because when we were talking about Grenfell Tower, I think that it was the fact that there wasn't enough emotion that was the issue. You know, I think that I'm completely with you, Michelle, that I don't think we should police people's emotional response. However, if you are a political leader, you should have a sense of responsibility for the well-being of the nation, vulnerable people, people in social housing. And I think, you know, maybe the reason that Jeremy Corbyn, for example, was hugging people was that he actually felt compassionate for them. You know,
but maybe that's just how he shows his
compassion. And maybe
compassion.
there were Conservative politicians hugging people away from the cameras because they also felt compassion, you know. But I don't think that there's anything wrong with leaders being emotional. And the second thing is that, you know, I also think this
is it wrong if they're unemotional?
Yeah, that's what I was about to come back at you.
Is it wrong if they just don't show emotions?
I think that everybody is responsible for their own emotional responses.
If
Theresa May had stood up and said, I reacted in this way because X, Y, Z, I think I would have respected it. But she got up and said I was wrong.
But we didn't see Winston Churchill wandering around the East End hugging people.
I mean, do we want to go back to leaders like Winston Churchill? That's a whole other conversation I'd love to have with you, especially given his views on empire and race. The other point is, you know, when I was talking about Grenfell Tower, you were both saying that we shouldn't politicise these kind of tragedies, which I agree with. The problem with campaigning in an election, especially elections, is that they necessarily involve scoring political points. That's what elections are. It's very difficult to run an election campaign in the wake of a tragedy without it getting politicised.
But I'm not just talking about the election. I'm just using my experience within the election as a hook for it. It's much broader than just my experience within the election. I think that we're getting to the point where people are told, if you don't react in this way, and in fact they're told, you must react in this way, and if you don't react in this way...
We're also in an era, though, where we publicise all parts of our lives through social media. Look, this is the meal that I'm having, this is the holiday that I'm having. Well, that's what people do. They expose their private life, don't they?
And
me. No, well, you don't. That's because I've seen what you eat and drink, and I'd be horrified for you.
Can I just ask you, this is, I know it's a bit off-season, but this is my issue with poppies. I wear a poppy because I really feel a sense of grief for people who died. If I don't wear a poppy, I don't expect people to tell me how I should be feeling and how I should mark my respect. And that is the problem. I agree with you that I think that we have started to police people's emotional responses, and I don't think we should. So I'm curious what your views on poppies are. Does that carry through for that you think people should have a choice?
But I think we're missing the point here, because the man in the street is never going to be criticised for the way he shows his grief. The reality is, it's people like us that will be criticised because we put ourselves out there, we publicise ourselves, we go on TV, we do social media, and therefore, you know, my view is it's our choice. If we really care, we shouldn't be doing this. But the minute you do television or the minute you become a politician, you set a standard. There is an expectation, rightly or wrongly, you know, because, you know, I'm sure that I've made comments and people criticise, and I don't justify it because I remind myself it was my choice to do television in the first place, and that's the price you pay.
But my point is simply, most people, don't matter if you're old, young, man, woman, politics, not politics, if you see people dying, burning in a building, it's going to hurt you. And you're going to literally be strange if it doesn't. It's going to hurt you. So why can't we just start with that assumption that obviously if something bad's happened, people care?
I think if the victims had been looked after, I don't think they'd have cared whether Theresa May looked emotional or not. I think that the emotion is a bit of a red herring. It was the fact that they were left without advice,
but the emotion wasn't a red herring,
without support. No, that's
where it became a huge issue, and that's my problem.
It became a symbol of what they were going through.